uh, from Ravi Ramanathan and Arvind Saraf. I really enjoyed both of them, and it's a fantastic session to start the summit. So now we will be starting a new session with Mohan Kancharla. Uh, Welcome, Dr. Mohan.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning to you. Nice to see you again. So we'll be talking about design thinking in ESG. Uh, so Dr. Mohan Kancharla is a globally recognized management consultant and former TCS global leader with 30 plus years of experience, a DBA specializing in design thinking and ESG, author of multiple books, co-innovator of a patented strategy validation framework, and a top 100 global management consultant by recognized by CEO today. So welcome, Dr. Mohan. Uh, Welcome to the show. And if you would like to introduce about yourself or the topic, and please take it forward from here.
Right. Thank you, Abdul. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure being here once again. So we do have a limited time, so we'll go straight to the presentation. It's in two parts. I will probably introduce design thinking in general and how it is applied in the industrial sector as a whole, looking at how it is applied in multiple verticals, and then we will then go on to how it can be applied specifically in the ESG space. Uh, just a quick call it. Am I audible
Yes,
and is my screen
yeah,
visible,
we
please?
can see your screen and also you're audible very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Right. So, when you hear about design thinking, it has become popular in the last, I would say probably about 5 to 10 years or so in the Indian context, and globally in the last, probably about 20 odd years. But truly speaking, design thinking has been around since the 1950s. In the 1950s, design science as a discipline was spearheaded by Buckminster Fuller, a serial innovator from MIT. And then in the 60s, the American professions expanded upon that. And then it went on in the name of industrial design or product design. And then that's when product design started to take its first small steps. Right? However, the term design thinking was coined by Herbert Simon, a Nobel laureate and a social scientist. And then later, Don Norman in the 80s, he introduced the term of user centered design, what we call as UX, or in the design thinking parlance, it's called as human centered design itself. And then design thinking as a method of creative action and innovation was formally launched in the Stanford D School or the Stanford School of Design, which became more popular as the Stanford D School. This was founded by the SAP founders, Ralph Faust and others. And later, and the gentleman that who really took it to the world into the business was David Kelly, who was the founder director of the Stanford D School. And later, he started his company called IDEO, which actually brought design thinking into the business world as a whole, right? Now, if one were to ask for a definition of design thinking, probably what comes to my mind is this definition from Tim Brown. He's a former CEO of IDEO, and he says design thinking is thinking as a designer would, kind of a thing. Now, what he implies here is that for most of us as marketers, as product owners, when we design a certain product, we create a product and or a service, and we take it to the market. We kind of push the product or the service onto the market. But if one were to take an analogy of an architect, for example, an architect doesn't come to us saying that, okay, here is a building and this is what you would need. You have a one ground of space, and I can build a two bedroom flat for you or a two bedroom house for you. What he actually comes to us is that he comes to us and hears us out in terms of what are our real needs. Now, I could then say that, look, I need some open space for my wife who does a gardening. My children have some pet cat and dog, so we need some space around the compound. I have elderly parents visiting us, so there should be definitely be one bedroom on the ground floor and maybe something on the first floor. So on and so forth. So you actually spell out your requirements, and only then something is created. Now this is a pull factor of a designer, and therefore it is an outside in thinking as opposed to an inside out push kind of a thing. So design thinking as a formal definition in its simplest form, I would say, is thinking as a designer would, right? Now, from then, the other explanation of that is that design thinking is best explained through this, triangle also. It's an intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability. Desirability is a user's unmet needs. Now, design thinking per se does not focus upon what is already served and to serve that in a better way, or a product that exists and to make it, improvise upon it. But design thinking focuses more in terms of how do I take care of my users' unmet needs itself. Once I know a certain way in which this has to be done, then I then explore technical solutions. Is this really feasible? Like, I may want to solve world peace or world hunger, but is it technically feasible? Now, even if we get a feasible technical solution, as businessmen and as industry leaders, we also want to make sure that it is viable from a business standpoint, kind of a thing. So, for the intersection of all of these three is where the innovation actually takes place, and that is where most of the human problems exist. And design thinking helps us to find these innovation solutions by work operating at the intersection of desirability, feasibility, and viability itself. The design thinking mindset, it's not about what can I do next kind of a thing. It's not about, okay, I've done this, so can I do something next, something better, and something different. It is the mindset for a design thinker is more in terms of, where do users need help the most kind of a thing. Now that's the mindset change that the design thinker would wear, for example. Okay. Now, in terms of the design thinking principles, now these are principles that are by no means exhaustive, but by and large, most design thinkers, in some shape or form, kind of dwell upon these five design thinking principles. One is the human centered design kind of a thing, keeping understanding whom we are designing for and looking at what is important for them. Embracing ambiguity and diversity. Complex problems are ambiguous, complex problems require diverse inputs, and for that, we need to be open towards radical collaboration. And we look at some of these principles as to how they got applied in different industries. Right? And whenever we collaborate and we create solutions, it's equally important that we co create impactful solutions. Collaboration is another key towards design thinking. And lastly, looked at design thinking operates upon the agility and the continuous improvement. You implement a certain solution and you iteratively improvise upon it. Now, these are the five design thinking principles, or what I would also term as the what of design thinking. Now, correlating to the what of design thinking, there are a set of tools or techniques that are there. This is what I call as a design thinking practices. Now, you would find here about 10, 12 practices that are listed here. Once again, these are not an exhaustive list of practices, but these are simple tools. And some of them might be pre existing already. I mean, techniques like interviewing techniques or brainstorming have always been there. It is not that they are new or design thinking brought them into the fore, but the reason that they get listed here is because these are more tools and techniques that are much more suited to the design thinking process, and they are much more aligned to the design thinking principles that we spoke about. Empathy maps is all about understanding the users, what their thoughts, ideas, feelings are. User personas are creating, and there is a distinction that gets made between a stakeholder and a persona. Stakeholder is a certain role that we would take, and persona is the same role which could vary from different instances, for example. So at my workplace, I might be an advisor. At this point, I'm a speaker. When I take my lectures, I'm a teacher. At home, I'm a father or a husband, etc. So my persona might change, the individual or the stakeholder in me can still remain the same. How might we is a simple prefix to any problem statement. Just by using the word how might we solve a city's parking problem, how might we solve a city's pollution problem, for example. Just by prefixing the problem will trigger a host of ideas for us. Storyboarding, as the name implies, it's drawing out a story spine or a story outline. Interviewing techniques, brainstormings are probably better understood already. Business model canvas is a one sheet. It's developed by Alex Osterwader, and it's a one sheet representation of the
Uh,
of.
Mohan, can you just hide that panel, the studio restream? Just to, yeah, can you just no, no, no,
Yes,
no. The next one. Okay, just share it and but hide it, hide that one.
I
I think you need to share again.
I'm not sure. So I'm back onto the main thing here.
Yeah, you need to share again. Yeah,
Oh, right.
you need to share again and then just hide that window so that the
Oh,
picture
this.
can be recorded very easily.
No, I take entire screen, and then when I click on share, this is what happens. Is it showing up now?
Uh, Nothing. Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah, you can just select. Yeah, do it as usual. But yeah, yeah, do it. Yeah, it's visible. Just that's one. Yes, fantastic.
We're good.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Good to go.
Right. Sorry about that. Right. So these are some of the design thinking practices, and journey maps is actually depicting the steps that are involved that one would go through. A good example is that in when we go to a bank and when if we were to withdraw cash, there is a sequence of steps that we would go through. It's about finding a form, finding a place to write, and filling up the form, getting a token, and getting a money, etc. Now the reason you once you put spell out these steps in that whole journey of a simple cash withdrawal. And if there are problems, we would be able to quickly identify where are the bottlenecks, where are the problems, and therefore how can we solve them. And many a time we have forms available, but there is no desk to write, and so there could be multiple reasons like that which will pop out. The practices around affinity diagrams, it's all about looking at a problem and finding a solution, and looking at alternative solutions and seeing that is it similar to the kind of solution that I looked at. If it is similar, I group those ideas together, and it's all about aggregation. Morphological analysis is the opposite of affinity. It's all about disaggregation. It is breaking a larger problem into a smaller problem and then solving the smaller problems, and then some of the parts will become the whole kit. Right? Rasker's hexagon looks at a problem and says that by virtue of solving this problem, is there another problem that I could also potentially solve, kind of thing, or does it create more problems, or does it by default solve another problem, etc. It's all about all the variations that are possible. That's a slightly little bit more difficult and a more complex technique as opposed to the other techniques, but it does come in handy in the context of design thinking. Value proposition canvas is an extension, or it's from the same authors of business model canvas. That's the end goal in terms of have I really looked at the customer's problems and solved them as a final checkpoint? What were their pains to start with? And have I created some element of pain relievers, for example, or what are the gains that they have, and how they created some element of gain creators for the gains that they've been looking for. So these are some of the design thinking principles and practices. We'll quickly look at how they got applied in a couple of industry verticals. So when you look at design thinking in banking. This is an exercise that we did for a Norway Scandinavian bank, and when the bank wanted to create a savings account for millennials. Right? Now, the conventional approach here would have been that you look at the savings account features and you scale the features in terms of the amount of withdrawal, in terms of the amount of minimum deposit, or the number of check leaves that could have been there, etc. Kind of a thing. But now, what the design thinking approach would advocate is that you apply the principle of human centered design. One reaches out to the end customer. So, we actually went and spoke to, we were not at the client side, not at the bank, but speaking to youngsters in colleges and malls and in sports arenas, etc., in movie theaters, and trying to understand what is it that is required and empathizing with their persona. Right? And what they were really looking for, I mean, this was the age when it was all banking was internet banking itself was in its nascent stage, and they were actually looking for internet banking. They were not interested in a checkbook or a minimum deposit, etc. All they wanted to make sure is that they have access to their banking anytime anywhere, kind of a thing. I mean, it's a pre-mobile banking. It's a simple internet banking in those days, kind of a thing. So the point here is in terms of the service design thinking advocates that you need to connect with the end users and figure out what their unmet needs are, and not about reconfiguring or your product features itself. Okay, so and this is design thinking how it got applied in the insurance sector. It's all about premiums for the auto insurance. Now, if you look at the auto insurance, conventionally most of the premiums are based upon the price of the asset itself, kind of a thing. Now, this was a time in a point of time when the company looked at openness to radical collaboration, and they were leveraging the cross-industry best practices. And this is a point of time when the telecom industry grew up and they started this pay-as-you-go model, kind of a thing. Now they said, okay, why can't I use that pay-as-you-go model into my own insurance for auto insurance and charge the premium based upon the usage as opposed to the asset cost? And the reasoning is that when does a claim happen? A claim doesn't happen in the garage when it's on the road. There's a breakdown or a usage or God forbid if there's an accident, etc. kind of a thing. And then they started to analyze that which car is used most on the road. Kind of thing. Now, most of us, might be driving a compact car within the city for our daily office commute, and maybe we might be using the larger car or an SUV for a luxury car for our weekend travels with family, or if you go golfing, etc. kind of thing, or a long drive, for example. So the whole premise is that the smaller car, though it is cheaper, is actually being used more on a weekly basis, and therefore the probability of that breaking down or probability of a claim on that is higher. So I'm going to charge my premium based upon the asset usage as opposed to the asset cost, kind of a thing. Another example that we figured it out by applying the principle of openness to radical collaboration. This is an example of Procter and Gamble Oral-B when they were launching the toothbrush for infants, kind of a thing. About 5 years old, 10 years old, they were launching the toothbrush. And when it went to the R&D department, the initial conventional approach was more in terms of resizing the adult toothbrush in terms of making the stalk smaller, making the bristles softer and smaller, etc. kind of a thing. But then when you actually they found that not there were not many takers and not many parents are buying that, and they started to observe the end users and they started to adopt an outside in approach. What they discovered is that when the infants, because of their hand motor skills, are not fully developed, yeah, a regular stalk is normally thin and it was slipping away from their hands and therefore they were not able to use it. So what was really required is a thickness of the stalk or the stem as opposed to irrespective of the length of it or the length of the bristles, kind of thing. So that's when Oral-B actually changed the infant toothbrushes to a thick, soft one, and then they were able to sell it more, kind of thing. Now, one could discover this only because you started to observe your end users and figure out what is the real unmet need. A similar example was taken to the vegetable peelers especially for adults with arthritis, elderly people with arthritis, or senior citizens. Their palms become smoother, and the regular vegetable or fruit peelers are steel, and they normally tend to slip away. So rubber took the same example and put that in a much more thicker rubber, and they were able to use it better. Right? This is about the value-added services for preferred customers in the preferred customers when they were looking at for their business class customers value added services. So most of the time what happens is that you tend to improvise upon your existing services itself. But what design thinking advocated is that you embrace ambiguity and diversity. You integrate your services with your adjacent industries. You looked at the journey maps and they started to enhance the journey from the aircraft carrier to the place to their local ground transport and to their hotel accommodations, etc. kind of a thing. And this is what actually the Go IBES-VE1 make my trip people created. Okay. The This is a classic example of design thinking in the life sciences and the healthcare. This is GE Healthcare engineer Doug Dietz when he was installing his first healthcare MRI machine in a pediatric hospital. He found that, to his dismay, he found there's a lot of anxiety on the parents and the child. And then he went back to Stanford D School and he learned this whole concept of design thinking. And he converted that whole experience into an adventure kind of a thing. So if you're familiar with the process, rather than going into a machine and lying down still in a very claustrophobic environment with lots of sounds and sights, what we tried to create, it made the whole experience with a lot of costumes, a lot of corridor painting, etc. And it could be like a jungle beat, etc. That everybody would get a lot of costumes, the parents, the child, and the technicians, etc. And finally they say, okay, this is a point where the pirates are coming. You need to hide. Here is a cave. Go and hide here and lay still until I tell you. And there's a lot of drum beat, etc. Which because of which MRI machine sounds gets camouflaged, and then that's what the promise. So the whole process was completed smoothly, kind of thing. And then Doug then goes on to write that the best feedback that he got is that apparently when the child comes out, she tells her father like, Daddy, can we come back tomorrow? I mean, that's music to music as far as any customer feedback is concerned. So these are few quick instances of how design thinking got applied in the industry as a whole, and that is what we have seen so far, kind of a thing. I mean, these examples illustrated how products were initially based upon features, and then slowly design thinking brought in the people aspect and built in the element of a human-centered design. But the future of design thinking is not sufficient if if you are stay alone along only with the product and the people. We need to bring in the element of planet also, and we now design thinking is now focusing on what is called as a humanity centered design. Okay. Now the same example of the infant toothbrush, as much as Procter and Gamble, they have conquered the basic the people centered design or the initial part. Now plastic is still not bio friendly kind of a thing. Now, if you want to extend that human-centered design element into a humanity-centered, maybe we should look at alternative materials like, let's say, a bamboo or more biodegradable, materials to use in the same small and thick toothbrush to take care of the planet. Okay. So with that, context, we now move on to the future of design thinking or design thinking in ESG. And as a precursor to that, let me share this, this D School framework. This is a design thinking framework, and it's come from the Stanford D School. And a lot of the other frameworks that came beyond it are by and large on a similar lines kind of a thing. It goes through the phases of empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test itself. We'll go through each of those phases with an illustration of an ESG goal. But quickly to wrap up this slide, what you see that it's not design thinking is not a linear or a sequential process. You find that there are feedback loops coming from any stage to every stage. Even at the test stage, if you think that there is a problem and if we haven't got the requirements correctly, we come back all the way to the empathize phase and go meet our users once again, redefine our requirements, ideate on more solutions, and redo our prototypes before we roll it out into the market itself, right? So that's the Stanford D School framework. There are several other frameworks also that have been in existence, kind of a thing. And but more by and large, most of them derive from these five phases in a similar manner. So with that context, let's now move on to our main topic in terms of how design thinking can be applied in the environmental, social, and governance. Right? I mean, as you're all familiar, it's E is environmental, the carbon. It talks about the factors that are impact the environment, be it carbon emissions or waste management practices. The social factors are whatever is impacting our stakeholders from an employees, customers, and the supplier standpoint. Governance is all about factors impacting the management of this whole process, be it in terms of shareholder rights or anti-corruption measures, etc. Together, they create a framework for evaluating a company's sustainability and its ethical impact. Okay, so this is what the UN Sustainable Goals. There are about 17 goals that have been UN has defined together, which will become a blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet. Right? It is an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. So therefore, ESG becomes important, and design thinking can truly play a role in the ESG context. So now, if I were to take one of the ESG goals, just for the purpose of illustration, I'll take the ESG goal 9, and the goal reads as industry, innovation, and infrastructure. How do you build resilient infrastructure that promotes inclusive and sustainable industrialization and fosters innovation? So that's the goal of that's defined by the goal number 9, and this is one of the two goals which has an impact on all the three factors, as in has an impact on environment, social, and governance. I mean, that's the reason that I've taken this goal. And under this goal, there are several targets. The target that we've chosen for our illustration is target 9.3. It's all about increasing the access of a line of credit for increase of access to financial service providers for affordable credit, kind of a thing, and how they can get integrated into the value chain and the marketplace itself. and every target has a certain indicator. Under the target of 9.3, there are two indicators, and one indicator is 9.3.2, which talks about proportion of small scale industries with a loan or a line of credit. So quickly to think that we are looking at a goal which looks at building a resilient infrastructure, and where the target that we are looking at is how do you look at the access to financial services and affordable credit to small and medium firms, for example, and what is the amount proportion of industries that have access to this particular thing. So with that, now if I then go into the first phase, so now within the empathies phase, so the empathies is in the Stanford D School's first phase that is there. And the empathize phase, the most relevant principle to my problem statement, most relevant with respect to SDG 9, for illustration purposes, I would have picked up human-centered design. It's all about understanding the end users in the ecosystem and what is it that is important to them. And with that principle, the most related practice or a tool or a technique is the empathy maps. Because my primary activity here at this point is to figure out how do I do a needs assessment kind of a thing, right? So that's why I've taken a principle of human-centered design. My practice is empathy maps, and I want to assess the needs of my sector in this particular thing. So, for example, if I'm imagining a trader in a tier two city and the challenges of his industry with respect to the available infrastructure. So, whom am I empathizing? So now in the right side, you will see an empathy map. It goes through a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step process. It looks at what the users are saying, doing, thinking, and what are their pains and gains. I'm empathizing in step one. I'm empathizing with the MSME sectors. What do they do? They manufacture or they trade. What do they need to be doing? They need to enhance productivity. They need to looking at ways to scale kind of a thing. What do they hear from their customers? They say from the financial service providers with respect to line of credit is in terms of they invariably keep asking for a strong collateral for it. And net of this is that what are their pains kind of a thing. Their main pains is that they need a short-term credit, and that too at a short notice kind of a thing. Short-term loans at short notice kind of thing. So this is what an empathy map will help us to do it out kind of a thing. And what is required here is a human-centered design. And the best way to capture that elements is through a empathy map. From the empathize phase, if I now go into the next phase, which is a define phase, in the defined phase, I'm embracing, and the principle that I've chosen is embracing ambiguity and diversity. Because I know that there is ambiguity in this whole process. The stakeholder that I'm dealing with are MSMEs on one side and the financial service providers. Stakeholders are the larger set of the people that you're working with. But within that, the role that they would take is different personas kind of a thing. Now I need to understand what, as a small trader, what if I go to a nationalized bank? The financial service providers persona as a nationalized bank could mean different as opposed to a small private bank, as opposed to a cooperative bank, or maybe there could be a lot of individual traders itself kind of a thing. So what I'm trying to do in this define phase is that my same scenario of a small trader in a tier two city, I'm trying to baseline what are all the different financial service providers that are available, and what are their different personas, and what are their different characteristics. So therefore, if I want to define my requirement, I would know what exactly and what is my best source of information that is available to me. Once I define my problem statement, then I go to the ideate phase. In the ideate phase, it is all about, now here I go wide. I mean, design thinking is all about converging. So in the define, we converge from various financial service providers into what could be my best suited. Now I diverge once again by opening myself into radical collaboration, by ideating, by prefixing the term how might we get a line of credit or short-term credit at short-term notice from a cooperative bank, for example. And I want to ideate upon various particular solutions or scenarios around that. And I want to prefix that, and I would want to be looking at what are all the different kind of interventions that I need to take care to provide to get this particular thing. So in the ideation process, I might want to go beyond private banking and say that, okay, can I look at microfinance, for example? Or how do I get collateral? Like, I mean, I'm not able to get collateral on my own, but what if I go to a trading community? Like, okay, there is an industry body in the bigger cities like a chamber of commerce, or in the smaller towns, or for the MSME sector, if there is a small trading communities that are available for a particular thing, can they provide? Can the community as a whole provide a certain amount of collateral for them, or chambers of commerce, or industry bodies? So these are all the different ideation techniques that one goes through and tries to identify what are all the possible interventions that we need to look at. Once I do that, then I come to the prototype and I now try to co-create innovative solutions. For that, I would want to evaluate the business model canvas. So this lays out, like I said, it looks at what are customer segments. I'm looking at SMEs and MSMEs. My relationships are with the bank's relationship managers. The value proposition that I'm looking for is a short-term credit at short-term notice, and my cost structure is typically cost plus production, and my revenue stream might be cost plus margin. My partnerships are with industry bodies, etc. So this lays out the entire scenario, and whatever ideation or whatever technique that I would got, now I would plot against this and figure it out. Have I looked at thing, and how do I evaluate those particular outcomes? Once I know the particular solution, in the last phase, I test it out and I look at the implementing and iteratively improvising upon it. Now, what happens in a business scenario is that conventionally, what happens is that the outcome is a question about you could do a cost benefit analysis and figure it out, have I got my returns as ROI have been great, kind of a thing. But in social things like ESG, or maybe a CSR kind of an activities, what is important is that you need to measure the intended outcome, and we also want to monitor the unintended outcome also, and that is something that is new to the design thinking itself, kind of thing. Now, if I were to apply the value proposition canvas here, the customer's jobs are manufacturing and trading. The pains that we said is the line of credit is one of the pain points that he's got. The gain that he's looking for is the access to the trading communities, for example. And in our solution, we were able to do that by providing the short-term credit at short-term notice, maybe through a microfinancing, which is supported or collateral that has been provided by the trading community, for example. So that is how we were able to draw the attention and make sure that the line of credit has been available, kind of thing. So, and I talked about the monitoring part of it. So so the measure is that have I been able to provide the line of credit? The answer is yes, and I probably have succeeded here. But like I said, what we also need to do is that we need to monitor the unintended outcomes. For example, is that are we making sure that the line of credit that has been given is being used only for the exact purpose that it was been doing, and there not any misuses in this particular instance. So that is what one example that they would want to look out, only for the internet, or is there some kind of a nexus that is being formed, to take care of these, the intended outcomes, kind of thing. Probably in the real estate world, the pre-RERA era was an example of the intended outcome, and there was some unintended outcome, and it was because of which the government had to intervene and formulate certain rules, kind of thing. So this is how we've seen phases so far, and I've in a very quick and short way I've been able to walk through in terms of how design thinking, in terms of an SDG goals, the Human Sustainable Development Goals, can be applied when you're planning to implement them to address these goals. Whatever be the relevant goal, design thinking can definitely play a role in how you go about planning that process. How do you go about defining solutions that are good from a features point of view, that are human centered and are also a humanity centered and are good from a planet standpoint, kind of a thing. We have taken a goal which has an impact on E, S, and G, all the three together, and we've seen that by applying a certain principle and related practices, how we can apply design thinking in this particular thing. And likewise, I'm confident that the process can be replicated for any of the other design thinking goals also. Okay, so that's a quick wrap through in terms of how we can apply design thinking in the ESG context. Uh, I mean, I normally do this over a couple of hours or a 2-day workshop. This is almost design thinking in ESG on steroids, or a real time scenario that has been done fast, kind of a thing. But then hope it kind of at least created some sense of awareness in terms of, yes, design thinking can be what design thinking is and how it can potentially be applied in the ESG context. That concludes my talk, and I'm happy to take any questions that you would have. Thank you.
So first of all, it's very, very interesting topic, Dr. Mohan. I think you took us through the whole process very nicely, and it's something. My question is, how does that mid-size organizations can jump into ESG journey from the to the design thinking? Yes, very large organizations, they have team to do it properly, uh, and they have knowledge to do it. So what is your advice for mid-sized manufacturing organizations? Largely they ignore, they know about it, but they did not jump into the ESG compliance and whatever we do.
Right.
What is your advice for them?
So typically what happens, and actually in all honesty, I think design thinking and the ESG can be applied much more in an MSME kind of a context,
Mm.
because large organizations have teams, they could work on it. There must be some CSR activity which is going on. There's some group level thing. But for MSMEs as a whole, even a simple thing. I mean, I'm based out of Chennai, and we have a, if I take a city like Coimbatore, for example, there is a lot of industries, a lot of MSME sector that is happening there, kind of a thing. And they're not mandated as such by by adherence to all of these goals, but in their own little way, if they can take care of consciousness in terms of there are other goals which talks about health and safety, for example. Now, all of us, irrespective of the size of the organizations, we are already handling this in some shape and form. We are providing health, we are providing safety, we are conscious about our environment, etc. We are doing all of this on our own. Now, on top of it, if I'm able to use these principles and do that in a slightly better way, in a slightly different way, and by doing so, I improve myself, and not only that, I'm getting closer and more compliant to SDG goals. It also becomes a value proposition for the organization as a whole itself, kind of a thing. So to that extent, it can be applied. One of the other challenges that these companies face is that most of these MSMEs are either first generation or second generation manufacturing organizations. They are largely family enterprises, and one of the this is a real challenge that they're facing is that to pass on this industry or this company onto the next generation is a real challenge that they're having, in the sense that
Correct.
I mean, the current generation is pretty much looking for the soft skills or the IT tech kind of a jobs, etc. In a safer environments, in a much more condition, as opposed to a manufacturing shop floor kind of a thing. So how do they look at it, kind of a thing, or how do they create if the owners or the founders next of kin are not willing to take that forward, how can they educate the local community and get them to scale up and take it forward? So there, what happens is that if you are able to provide them the education, if you are able to provide them your whole shop floor people, the villages, the rural people, if you're able to create education, which by the way is also another SDG goal kind of a thing in terms of learning and development around that. If you do that, you will be adhering to that goal, and by virtue of that, you'll be creating a workforce, you'll be creating environment, and you'll be able to take forward your company also, kind of thing. So there are a platitude of ways in which these can be interlinked and learned and captured. They are already, I would say, they are already doing it. This gives you an avenue to do that in a slightly better way, in a different way. And the bonus point is that you also, in the process, you also become compliant to an SDG
Mm.
goal, which you may not be mandated, but it's good to have it.
Yeah. I think ESG, we should not consider that as a separate initiative. It's a culture, basically. So if you comply with that, so going forward, it will benefit you. And also, as you are aware, one of the main motivation for ESG compliance is about the investors. Okay, so I think they will look in that dimension, anyways. Okay, so yeah, especially the environmental and social part, governance maybe to some extent they will do it. It's a mandatory for them for business success. So environmental and social, if the organization is aligned, then it's a long-term sustainability.
And of
It's a
that
sustainable.
example that you brought about the investors and the social element of it, and if you also look at the the today's consumer based kind of a thing. We're all talking about conscious capitalism and conscious consumerism, and making sure that the factories, whether it's a leather shoe factory or a garment factory, they are also in line with the way they treat the workforce and so on. If they take care of those factors, that is where I would buy those products as opposed to something else. And even in Europe, H&M also had a major issue around this, and so they have to look at that and revisit that.
Fantastic. Design thinking and ESG combination is much very critical and also very interesting. So, any literature on this you would like to advise for the audience to follow through, or is it anything,
I mean,
Dr. Mohan?
there are several references that are available, and when you look at design
I
thinking,
personally don't find one good benchmark reference kind of thing. Maybe you need to follow your book.
no, no, my book is kind of limited to the consulting world. Anybody who's in the advisory service, yes, they can definitely gain from it. But there is what I could do, Abdul, is that maybe as part of the presentation, I'll plug in a few references or books that are there, which I'm sure
Yep,
that can be shared with the
yep,
participants.
yep. That will be. Yeah.
But there are, I mean, like I said, the IDEO people. There are some good videos from David Kelly, Tom Kelly, IDEO books on change by design, etc. It's good. Design thinking. There's a gentleman called Pavan Soni who has written a book on design thinking,
Mhm.
uh, and that it has got a lot of examples from the Indian industry kind of a thing.
Okay.
So
Okay.
from the Arvind Eye Care Foundation and so many other places that is there. When we look at design thinking from a
Mhm.
design thinking in the ESG context, Dan Brown, who is also
Mhm.
one of the authors, he designing for a better world is one of the recent books where he talks about humanity centered design. And even Kotler, when he talks about marketing, he extended that into marketing into H2H marketing, what he calls it as. And there he emphasizes that design thinking plays a key role in it, and the
Mhm.
design thinking mindset that the graphic, again, it's not Kotler's version. It has been in pre-existence, but he leverages that graphic to emphasize the importance of design thinking and in the context of human to human marketing. Literature is limited, but design thinking, it's more of a, like I said, it's more of a mindset, and it can be
Mhm.
applied in any industry kind of a thing. I am
Correct.
currently working on how design thinking can be applied in the education sector, and there's tremendous potential.
Excellent. Excellent lecture. So, any top three key takeaways from you, Dr. Mohan, for the audience?
Right. So I would say that design thinking is fundamentally, it's a human-centered design, and it can be applied in any particular field. It's all about putting I mean, we use the firm term, put yourself in the customer's shoes, very loosely, but, focusing on empathize literally means that itself kind of a thing. And as you learn the design thinking process, and when I teach and when people apply that, two things stand out. One, you can apply it quickly in any particular context. Like, so that in that sense, students are quite happy about the concept of design thinking, and they even extend that further, saying that you can quickly start to see apply that in your own personal life itself kind of a thing. And there are books on that, also designing your life
Mhm.
is another book that comes to my mind, where you can apply design thinking principles in a personal way kind of a thing. So it's all about looking at the problem from a customer standpoint, understanding what they need, how we can create a solution. We want to make sure that we ideate and we collaborate with as many possible. We co-create solutions. We take our customers into confidence in term when to hear our problem, but when it comes to solutioning, we assume that we do it, we know better and we do it. But what design thinking advocates is that involve your customers also in the problem solving process. And design thinking requires us to look at the not just our customers, but our customers,
Customer.
as in the end customers itself kind of a thing. So if I were to do design thinking for a bank, it's no longer good in terms of talking to the bank, but I should be able to reach out to the end customers to
In
figure out
customer.
what are their real needs kind of a thing. So if
Great.
you look at these principles, I'm sure you'll be able to apply design thinking and get the true value out of it.
Yeah. So, one question from Ajay Nair is how are we in India placed in design thinking compared to the global standards at the moment?
Right. We probably, like I said, in the Indian context, it started to become popular more in the 5 to 10 odd years, I would say. We started in my survey. I discovered this by accident about a decade ago, and since then I got quite fascinated, and that's how I said, rather than products and services, can I apply it in the consulting and advisory space? It was doable, and I created the hypothetical framework. I took it to the practitioners and thought for my doctoral thesis, and it was found to be valid. Design thinking started to become popular in the at the board level, in the education sector. The Indian government in the schools also, they are propagating design thinking even at a school level, seventh or 10 plus two levels also. Uh, all the engineering colleges and the B schools in the academic circles, they have taken it up in a large way. They are using industry is currently using design thinking. Whenever you go for, let's say, when you do a strategy planning or a business plan for the next year, they are looking at design thinking. So it's not that you need to apply design thinking as a whole, go through the same sequence of 5 phases and do it. Just
Mhm.
take a principle. Okay, in the past, if I'm doing it, am I doing it only with one stakeholder? Am I inviting my my customer into my strategy planning process? Even if you do that one step, that's good enough for me, kind of thing, right? So there are various stakeholders. Are we involving them? So it is gaining momentum. People are much more and more familiar with it, and they do want to take it forward.
Excellent. So thank you, Dr. Mohan, for a very insightful lecture. Due to time constraint, yeah. So we, ladies and gentlemen, give a big round of applause to Dr. Mohan for insightful lecture. If you have any questions to Dr. Mohan, please post it in YouTube or share it to our team, the organizing team. We will just make sure that you get connected and discuss with Dr. Mohan to answer your questions. And also, if you need any help in ESG or design thinking initiatives, please reach out to Dr. Mohan. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan, for the session. Wonderful session.